Guys, today, the Caitlin Clark stimulus package just got approved by Congress today. It's fitting that last time a new CBA deal was reached
in the high-stakes, multi-billion-dollar world of global sports business. The slickest trick a labor union can pull off is selling the illusion of collective corporate value. When a huge wave of cash crashes into an organization, the union rushes to the mic, takes a loud victory lap, and claims the entire workforce built that fortune together through shared dedication. But once you cut through the glossy headlines, skip the polished press releases, and actually study the spreadsheets,
is upon us. The WNBA generated enough revenue in 2025 to trigger revenue sharing with players for the first time.
The truth hits different. The numbers don't lie, and they don't play favorites. In elite entertainment economies, wealth is almost never created equally. Most of the money usually comes from a tiny fraction of the talent, while the rest ride the current.
From 2016 to 2019, they dispersed $280,000. Nobody was buying jerseys, trading cards, merchandise, none at all. None whatsoever. Then from 2020 to 2025, now we're splitting up.
And right now, the WNBA Players Association is celebrating a historic financial milestone. It was a team-built empire. The headlines frame it as a collective breakthrough. But the deeper story is way more complicated. The spotlight is shining on a league-wide win. Yet the real driver behind this moment is far more concentrated than people want to admit. What we're seeing looks like a rare economic shockwave. The kind nobody predicted. A surge of cultural momentum around one generational point guard flipped the math upside down. Suddenly, the league's value shot up. Attention exploded.
Expenses. Quote, "We've grown as a union and put our name, image, and likeness into a collective package." Nneka Ogwumike says, "The union exists for us to be able to represent all players, so I think it's a great way for all players to be able to share."
And new money poured in. That energy is now padding paychecks across the roster, including players who weren't drawing measurable market demand on their own. That's not shade. That's supply and demand in action. So let's break this down cleanly and calmly. We're talking about the WNBA's new revenue-sharing payout, group licensing deals, and the sharp reality check delivered by a billionaire team owner. To really grasp what's happening, you have to go back to the 2020 collective bargaining agreement. That deal included a flashy revenue-sharing trigger that sounded empowering on paper. The players would receive 50% of incremental revenue, but only if the entire league hit a strict financial benchmark.
In fact, on the WNBA, all the metrics went up. So this was last season, right, when she first came into the league from college. And we've seen all of our metrics from viewership.
Here's the catch. That benchmark wasn't light work. It was built off the league's 2019 revenue and required a steep 20% growth rate every single year for 5 straight years. Compounded growth at that level is serious business. For a league that had been struggling to scale, it looked nearly impossible. Year after year, the target stayed out of reach. Explanations rolled in. The global pandemic, weak marketing pushes, tough TV slots. But beneath all that, the core issue was simple. The product, as structured, wasn't connecting with a mass mainstream audience at the level needed to hit those numbers. Financial analysts quietly labeled the revenue-sharing clause a phantom trigger. On paper, it existed. In reality, it felt unreachable. The league relied heavily on ownership support, and that growth projection seemed more hopeful than practical. Most insiders believed it would sit untouched for decades. Then everything changed. A once-in-a-generation star stepped into the league, and the economic landscape flipped overnight. Ticket demand spiked. Broadcast numbers jumped. Sponsorship interest climbed. What used to look like fantasy math suddenly became achievable. And now, for the first time in the league's 28-year history, the revenue-sharing benchmark has officially been triggered. In 2025, the WNBA generated enough raw revenue to activate that long-dormant clause. The result? An unprecedented $8 million pool set to be distributed among players. That milestone is real, and the payout is real. But the debate over how that wealth was truly generated is just getting started. Across all 13 rosters, the Players Union lit up social media the second the news dropped. Champagne bottles popped, victory posts flooded timelines, and the message was loud and bold. This $8 million payout proves their collective value. Union leaders are using this moment as leverage, tying it directly to their demand for a 27.5% share of gross revenue in the 2026 CBA negotiations. They're looking billionaire owners straight in the eye and saying, "Look at the revenue we just generated. We hit the benchmark. Now it's time to pay us what we deserve." That's the energy. But the $8 million check is just one piece of a much bigger financial puzzle. The real story, the one not getting the same glossy headlines, is sitting inside the league's group licensing revenue. In pro sports, group licensing is serious business. We're talking jersey sales, licensed apparel, trading cards, video game likeness rights, all the merchandise that turns athletes into brands. Historically, the WNBA's group licensing numbers were shockingly low. Not just modest, painfully low. The kind of numbers that made analysts raise their eyebrows and double-check the decimal points. From 2016 to 2019, over a full 4-year stretch, the entire Players Union distributed just $280,000 in group licensing revenue. Read that again, 4 years. One professional league. $280,000 total. That means fan demand for merchandise was barely moving. Jerseys weren't flying off shelves. Trading cards weren't hot commodities. Consumer appetite for WNBA gear was minimal at best. Then the last 12 months flipped the script in dramatic fashion. The union has now announced a jaw-dropping $9.25 million in group licensing revenue. That's a staggering 3,200% spike. Not a slow climb, not steady growth, a vertical explosion. And the overwhelming majority of that $9 million surge came within a single calendar year. Now here's the part that shifts the whole conversation. That $9.25 million didn't appear because fans suddenly rushed out to buy jerseys for every bench player across the league. It wasn't a random, evenly spread surge in demand across all rosters. The bulk of that revenue was driven by one cultural lightning rod. Caitlin Clark merchandise, Caitlin Clark trading cards, Caitlin Clark branded apparel. Her arrival triggered a tidal wave of consumer interest that the league had never experienced before. But because of how the union structures its group licensing deal, those profits don't stay tied to the individual who sparked the sales. Instead, every participating player places their name, image, and likeness into a shared pool. As one prominent union leader explained, "We put our name, image, and likeness into a collective package." That single sentence lays out the entire model. This system is designed to protect players across the full roster. The profits generated by a breakout megastar are pooled together and distributed evenly among more than 250 union members. It's a collective approach operating inside a hyper-competitive sports market. The strategy ensures stability for role players, developmental athletes, and veterans who may not drive independent merchandise demand on their own. So when that $9 million licensing pool gets split, the checks don't reflect individual sales performance. They reflect shared participation. That's not accidental, it's intentional design. The union calls it solidarity. Critics call it redistribution. Either way, the financial shift is massive, and it's reshaping the economics of the entire league in real time. That massive payout doesn't just cover players active in 2025. It also includes athletes who have already retired and others who were released from their contracts. Let that sink in for a second. The structure means former players, women no longer competing in the league, are about to see direct deposits that could reach $50,000. And that money is flowing in because fans in places like Iowa and Indiana rush to grab the number 22 jersey of a rookie point guard. Union leadership calls this sharing in the growth. They frame it as a powerful collective triumph, a rising tide lifting every boat. But in the hard-edged world of sports business, this setup raises serious debate. The surge in merchandise revenue tied to Caitlin Clark is being pooled and spread across hundreds of players, including those no longer on the court. Supporters say it's solidarity. Critics say it's heavy redistribution inside a performance-driven marketplace. Here's where the tension builds. There's a clear gap between who is driving the bulk of consumer demand and who is benefiting from the payout structure. That gap is exactly why talk of a 2026 lockout keeps getting louder. The union is walking into negotiations holding up the $8 million revenue sharing trigger and the $9 million licensing pool, proof that the league's value has skyrocketed across the board. They argue these benchmarks confirm exponential league-wide growth. But the owners across the table aren't reacting emotionally. They're studying data. They aren't focused on social media celebrations. They're locked in on internal metrics, sales breakdowns, and audience analytics. They know precisely where the new revenue originated and which players' presence moved the needle the most, and if there was any uncertainty about ownership's perspective. Joe Tsai just made it crystal clear. Tsai isn't just another executive in a suit. He's the billionaire co-founder of Alibaba Group and the primary owner of the New York Liberty, a businessman who built his empire analyzing consumer behavior and financial trends at the highest level. On a hot mic, he didn't hedge or soften the numbers. He laid them out directly. Viewership, ticket sales, sponsorship, everything went up almost 4 times. That's not a vague compliment. That's a data-backed statement. 4 times growth, 4 times the attention, 4 times the commercial activity. When a billionaire owner publicly confirms that key metrics jumped nearly 400% following the arrival of one specific player, that changes the tone of negotiations instantly. It signals that ownership views this surge as star-driven, not evenly distributed across the roster. And in high-level bargaining, that distinction matters. The union is pushing hard for 27.5% of gross revenue, arguing the league has entered a historic growth phase. Ownership, however, appears to be framing the moment differently. From their standpoint, this isn't broad-based collective expansion. It's a spike powered by a singular phenomenon. And if both sides stay locked into those opposing views, the 2026 showdown could turn into one of the most intense labor battles the league has ever seen. The core product of the WNBA in 2025 looks a lot like it did in 2023. The teams, the structure, the competition, that foundation hasn't magically transformed overnight. The argument from ownership circles is simple. The baseline business may account for roughly 25% of the current revenue surge, while the remaining spike is being credited to one explosive market-shifting force, Caitlin Clark. That 4 times multiplier that unlocked the $8 million bonus didn't come from a slow, balanced climb. It came from a sudden star-driven surge. From the owner's perspective, you can't permanently redesign the league's entire long-term financial system around what they view as a rare, unpredictable boom tied heavily to one generational talent. They're fine-cutting temporary checks. They'll honor triggered benchmarks. They'll let the licensing pool get distributed. But when it comes to locking in higher guaranteed revenue splits for years ahead, that's where resistance kicks in hard. Ownership groups are wary of committing to structural financial obligations based on what they see as a spike, not a stabilized trend. They argue that long-term debt and guaranteed percentages must be based on durable league-wide growth, not a moment of concentrated attention. And that's where this battle gets intense. Here's the irony that makes this situation even more dramatic. During the 2024 season, some veteran voices publicly pushed back on the nonstop spotlight. Around Clark, there were complaints about media imbalance. There were hard on-court matchups that sparked debate. There were repeated calls for recognition of the veterans who built the league's foundation. That tension was visible. Fast forward to now. And many of those same players are set to benefit from licensing checks fueled largely by merchandise tied to Clark's name. That contrast is impossible to ignore. On one hand, there's frustration over attention gaps. On the other, there's financial upside connected to that very spotlight. It's a complicated mix of pride, competition, and economics colliding all at once. The league now stands at a crossroads. Players see rising revenue and interpret it as proof of collective elevation. Owners see internal analytics showing heavy concentration around a singular draw. When the current CBA expires, the union is expected to push for compensation that reflects the 4-times spike. Ownership may counter that the multiplier belongs to a specific market force, not the entire structure. So here's the real question. Is the union's group licensing model a smart shield that protects every athlete in a volatile industry? Or does it blur the line between individual star power and collective entitlement? And does Joe Tsai's public confirmation of a near 400% jump strengthen ownership's negotiation stance? Drop your unfiltered, analytical take in the comments. If you want sharp breakdowns on the real business, the leverage plays, and the financial chess match behind pro sports, hit subscribe, tap like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive. This channel doesn't run on surface-level headlines. We follow the numbers, track the strategy, and break down the economics that shape the game.